Hi, I am Allie with the Sacramento History Museum, and thank you for turning in for another one of our Find Out More Fridays. This month we are continuing our neighborly series from last month, where we look at different neighborhoods throughout Sacramento and a little bit more about their history. Now, I decided for the first one I'm going to do to talk about Meadowview, because this is where I happen to live, so I had some ulterior motives. But I also thought it was good to get us away from the more central city and look at some of our suburbs. So Meadowview is still part of Sacramento, but it is a sparse suburban area. We are the southernmost region of Sacramento, being in District 8. The borders exactly of Meadowview are debated by different people, but most people consider it to be Florin to the north. To the east, it is the Watt I-80 Meadowview light rail. To the west, it is I-60, which is about where Freeport is, and to the south, it is a wide open field, a view of a meadow, if you will. Now, past that wide open field, they have recently built the new Delta Shore Shopping Center, and that is technically part of Meadowview as well, which ruins that border a little bit. But this is an area that you're not going to find a central downtown. You're not going to find Victorian buildings. It's much newer, and it is built like a suburb. So we're going to start walking down 24th Avenue, which is one of the main arteries here of Meadowview, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the history here. So it's a post-war neighborhood. What that means is it was built roughly in the 1940s as a place for veterans and their families, as well as other just people looking for change out of a traumatic event to move. Now, this neighborhood originally had predominantly Mexican-American and African-American immigrants moved to it, but that diversity didn't last forever. So later on, in the 1960s, it really started to come into its own. We had a lot of veterans, a lot of families, a lot of business owners all moving to this area, and it was predominantly white. That time it was about 90% white, with roughly 2% of any other ethnic group living here. And it was considering to be flourishing for quite a while. There was a farmer's market, there were small businesses, there was a community hub here separate from the central heart of Sacramento. And then in the 1970s, this area started to approve low-income housing. And that led a lot of the white population to be concerned that this would become an area of crime. And so, as happened elsewhere throughout the nation, there was some white flight, specifically to Elk Grove to the south and to some other suburbs that were developing in the east, like Roseville and Rockland. And the diversity changed greatly. It became majority black very quickly, with quite a bit of Hispanic and Asian communities here as well. And in sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy, this did result in some crime. A lot of those white families that left were the business owners. And so quite a few of the small businesses shut down. 24th, which are on right now, used to be a really central hub of the city, and two of the gas stations at the intersection of Meadowview and 24th, as well as the farmer's market at Meadowview and 24th, shut down. And there was also, unfortunately, a huge crack. I'm sorry, I'm laughing at my videographer dancing around the debris in the street. There was a huge crack epidemic in the 1970s and 80s as well. And quickly, Meadowview got a reputation. It was known as an area of gangs, of crime, of some place you really didn't want to let your kids go, a place you would never consider moving. But that's not what Meadowview is today. It has changed quite a bit since then. It is actually now the second lowest crime district of all of the districts here in Sacramento. It is still the most diverse district. I actually have the exact statistics. As of 2016, it is 34% Hispanic, 25% African American, 20% Asian, 12% white, 5% Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander, and 4% mixed race. So Sacramento often advertises itself as a diverse community, and Meadowview really is a great example of that. It also has been home to quite a few really interesting, famous characters over the year. And I want to talk about that in a second. But first, as we're coming up to John Still Drive, which is another major artery here in Meadowview, I want to talk about a historic man of interest, John Still. So John Hamilton Still came out here during the gold rush. He came in 1850, and he was an early newspaper man. But rather than starting a newspaper, he decided first in San Francisco and then here in Sacramento to open different bookshops where you could buy books, but you could also get imported newspapers. Now, John Still was one of two brothers, and he was the more industrious of the two. So he invited his brother Bill out here and offered to let him take care of the Sacramento location while he and his business partners would focus on the San Francisco locations. Bill did not share his brother's hardworking ethic, and so he gladly accepted the payment for his brother to bring him out here, and then he accepted his first month's wages and hightailed it out into the hills. And he thought he would earn his fortune in gold. He made about 50 cents worth of gold. So he gave up on that dream pretty quickly and did come back here. But then he ended up being arrested for stealing from that establishment. And the record of him kind of goes away. But John Hamilton Still did come back up to Sacramento at that point, did continue to run this bookstore. This street actually used to be one of our numbered streets. We're still on the grid here, so this used to be 71st Avenue. But it was renamed in honor of John Still with the encouragement of his great-granddaughter in the 1960s. All right, now let's cross the street. We're in basically the suburbs, as I said. It's mostly residential around here, but still want to be safe. It's a pretty active neighborhood. Lots of different people are living here. As I mentioned, it's very diverse ethnically. Economically, it's not as diverse. It does have predominantly individuals, large families. Very few have a bachelor's or master's degree, and it is still one of our most lowest income districts in Sacramento. So there is some poverty. There are lots of different people with lots of different ways of life living in Meadowview. Just going to refer to my notes. Oh yes, I was going to talk about some of our famous residents. So my favorite, because it's very close to my house, the park that's named after him, is LeVar Burton. He grew up in Meadowview, if you didn't know about that. Not for too long. By his teenage years, he had actually moved to Galt, but he was born and raised in Sacramento. Mahisha Dellinger, who's a beauty Mongol and author, grew up in Meadowview. Another famous one is Kevin Galloway, the professional basketball player. He grew up here in Meadowview. All right. Now, as I was saying, in the 1980s, even into the early 1990s, Meadowview was not an area you would want to come, and it's still fighting against that reputation today. Many of the community leaders here feel that they're an underrepresented, underserved community in Greater Sacramento, and that unfortunately they really didn't get much funding or support from the mayor or the city until unfortunately Stephen Clark was shot here in Meadowview, and that brought up new conversations about safety. But those community leaders have been working since the 90s to really make this a better place, and two of the ones I want to highlight are the Pannells, Samuel and his wife Bonnie. Samuel Pannell was a pivotal city council member who, among other things, really wanted to make sure that the Black members of the community got their fair shake. And he and his wife really cared about the economic development, education, and just general cleaning up of Meadowview, and especially dealing with all of the drug houses that were still around out of the crack epidemic. Unfortunately, Samuel Pannell, despite working tirelessly to create a new community center here in Sacramento, had an untimely death. And so his wife Bonnie actually decided to run for his city council spot and won. And she continued the efforts that they had been doing together and made some really significant changes. They were able to close down a lot of apartment complexes and hotels that were working as drug dens. They were able to build a beautiful new community center on the corner of 24th and Meadowview, where we're walking now. And as I mentioned in the past, 24th and Meadowview was kind of the heart of this community. It's where that farmer's market was. It's where a lot of the businesses was. There were never a downtown here, but it was a good central area. And now that community center has brought it back to being the heart of the community. This is where you will be able to take classes, go to different athletic programs, have after-school programs. There's quite a few Polynesian dance competitions. There's a huge Tongan community here in Meadowview. There's also quite a few different cultural festivals, again highlighting that diversity here in Meadowview. As I was mentioning, colorful characters of all kinds around here. So as we are walking up to that community center and approaching Meadowview, I want to thank you so much for joining me today for this Find Out More Friday to talk about my neighborhood. It's very different from Oak Park, very different from the Marshall School that Susan talked about last month, but it's still a very interesting and dynamic, changing neighborhood here in Sacramento. And a lot of the community leaders here today are continuing to work to make improvements, to make it a place that the youth, their youth, and future generations will want to live. And I'm really excited to get to be a part of that. So just in case you haven't gotten to see it as we are further away, across the street here is that Sam and Bonnie Pannell Center. And it continues to be that central point that we continue to push for that change and betterment. And if you haven't been to Meadowview before, I do encourage coming down, checking it out. We're only 8 miles from the hub of downtown, 15 minutes for me to get to work. And there is a lot to see and do here, a lot of small businesses, a lot of excellent food. So come and check it out if you haven't. We won't be doing a Find Out More Friday next week, but then in 2 weeks we will be doing another. We'll be looking at East Sacramento, which honestly has multiple neighborhoods within that large title. So we'll get to learn more about that. Thanks for joining.